This is Lewis Hart for Boxing Social in association with Empire Fight Store and Forged Irish Stout. Delighted to be joined in the new year with Dan Rafael. It hasn't been too long since we last caught up, but there's obviously the new year. I started with some breaking news. Before I do start talking about that, how was your Christmas? How was your New Year? How was it?
Pretty low key, but good. I'm glad to get off to a new year. Hopefully, we get a year of boxing like we had last year.
Absolutely, I definitely hope that as well. I guess we'll just start firstly on the Golden Boy card last night. Sort of just touch on the main event and the co-main event. Closely, first one we'll start on the co-main event. Ismael Barroso, turning back the clock, defying the years once again and stopping Ohara Davies in emphatic fashion inside a round. What did you make of the fight of how much it lasted?
Well, I don't think you can ever be totally shocked if Ismael Barroso scores a knockout in a victory because he's been a good puncher for his whole career. The fact that he was able to knock out Davies in the first round was a little bit surprising. The fact that he won was a little bit surprising because Davies comes in, much younger, first fight on the new contract with Golden Boy. He's the favorite. Everything is set up for him for some stuff down the line. And, he got nailed. Barroso, I know people joke around because he's 40, but he looks much older. But the man can punch. There's no mistaking that whatsoever. And he caught him, and he caught him again, and he put him down twice. And even though, Ohara showed the heart to get up both times, clearly after that second knockdown, he was all done, and the referee made the proper decision to end the fight. But that's sometimes guys, you have a knockout loss, you can overcome it and move on to the next. It's a little hard, though, to see how, and I'm not saying he can't do it, but it's going to be really difficult for Davies to overcome that type of knockout in that type of situation, given that he's been stopped previously and where he is in his career. That's a rough one. And it's, you can't not be happy for Barroso after how he got totally screwed against Rolly Romero in his previous fight that cost him winning the WBA title. Now he has the interim title, and supposedly when Romero was back to health and no longer dealing with the back problem, that he will be the next up in the mandatory fight. Now Rolly was at ringside. Well, we'll see what he winds up doing. There's been a lot of conversation. He may go the direction of a Ryan Garcia fight, which I guess could certainly still happen, but I guess it would be without the belt. But we'll see. But it was a great win for Barroso and a hugely debilitating loss for Davies, who, by the way, I feel like maybe was a little overconfident going into that fight. I had the occasion to speak with Eric Gomez, who was the president of Golden Boy Promotions, the day before the fight, and he was with Ohara at the time that I called Eric about something not related to that particular bout. And he's like, "Hey, you want to say hello to Ohara?" So yeah, sure. So we put him on the phone, and I chit chat with Ohara for a minute or two, and he says, "Mate, I'm coming to take over your country." I said, "Okay, good luck." Didn't work out, did it?
Yeah, unfortunately. Staying on the topic of Barroso and the Rolly fight, do you feel like sort of the rematch? Everyone wanted the rematch after the questionable stoppage, which we'll get into questionable stoppages just in just a second. But do you feel like that was it's like sort of justice for boxing in a way after sort of Barroso got robbed against sort of robbed against Rolly in their fight in May?
Well, yeah, he was talking about how it's quote unquote justice. It was a terrible stoppage in the fight against Rolly, a fight that Barroso was winning handily, beating Romero, fairly handily, and it was a bad stoppage from the referee in that fight, Tony Weeks. I'm sure we're going to get into his situation in the next fight, but look, Barroso is like old man doing his thing. He's got the two fists and he can punch with both of them, and he's a good puncher, and it was a big win for him.
Absolutely. You just mentioned there about stoppages and very questionable ones. Vergil Ortiz Jr. came back from a lengthy layoff to, I put in quotations, to stop Frederick Lawson last night. Another very, very questionable stoppage from Tony Weeks, as we was mentioning, as he did have Barroso versus Rolly a couple months ago. Obviously last night you tweeted about your your sort of frustrations with the stoppage that many people did echo. Sort of a very, very questionable one, to say the least.
In the first fight that we were just talking about with Davies against Barroso, no problem with that stoppage. He was badly hurt. He was down twice. He was getting clipped with everything. I didn't see anybody complain about that knockout whatsoever. He was glassy-eyed. That's what the referee's there to do, to stop the fight and make sure the fighter doesn't get hurt, and that's what he did. In the main event with Vergil Ortiz against Frederick Lawson, it's the exact opposite, in my opinion. Now, Tony Weeks has been, and I've known Tony for, almost 25 years. He's a great guy. He's been a great referee. He's refereed some of the biggest fights in boxing. He will always be remembered for the job he did in what I view as maybe the greatest fight in the history of boxing, which I was privileged to be ringside for. That is the first fight between Jose Luis Castillo and Diego Corrales for the unified lightweight title. That is in 2005, so a long time ago. But to think that the man that refereed that glorious fight was the same guy that stopped the fight the way he did between Lawson and Ortiz is like a different referee. He's been a professional referee for 20 years. He's done nearly 900 professional fights. I actually knew we were going to talk about this before, we got on the call. So I actually looked up because I was wondering, I know Tony's done a ton of fights. I checked. If you look on his box rec, he's just a hair under 900 professional fights. He's done, zillions of title fights and some of the biggest, big mega pay-per-view fights that you can think of. And like I said, he's probably going to be in the Hall of Fame someday as a referee. But he's not showing himself to be a Hall of Fame ref these days. He is, he's 67 years old. And, he had the terrible stoppage that's been heavily, heavily criticized between Barroso and Romero that took place in November of last year. And now he starts off the calendar year of 2024, the first main event of the first notable card. And boom, a stoppage that just defies logic, made zero sense, was no reason to stop the fight. I made the point, if you're going to stop a boxing match because of that, then why should boxing even be allowed? They should just pillow fight or I don't even know. It just was ridiculous. Yeah. Yes. Vergil Ortiz landed some nice punches. He landed some good body shots, some stiff jabs. He had backed Frederick Lawson into to the ropes near one of the corners, and he was letting his hands go. I've watched the replay of the stoppage several times since that happened last night. And he threw, numerous probably about 10 to 12 unanswered punches. The problem is the ones that landed primarily were body shots and not even hard body shots. Even Vergil said afterwards he wasn't throwing full blast. Yeah. And the shots that landed upstairs were not clean shots. And most of them missed. They were being, Lawson was either slipping them or catching them on the gloves. The point is there was not a quote unquote telling shot. I remember having had conversations with the late great referee Steve Smoger, who I was friendly with for a number of years, and we would see each other at fights and we would talk boxing. And I would pick his brain on his philosophy of how to referee, because I always considered him, one of the great referees in the sport, and talk about when in his mind was the proper time to stop a fight. And he would always talk about the telling blow, the shot that really discombobulated the opponent, or rocked his head back, or something that was okay, now I got to stop the fight. And he went through chapter and verse on his thoughts about it. There was no shot like that, even close to that kind of shot in this particular fight. So I know it's easy to dump on Tony. And again, it doesn't make him a bad guy. I think he's a great guy. And he's been a great referee. That was an atrocious stoppage. And it robs Lawson of a chance. It robs Ortiz of the rounds he desperately needed after 17 months out of the ring, the opportunity to score a more emphatic victory. And it's the first round. Okay. I get that these are not 4 rounds. Even if that was a 4-round preliminary bout between two guys making their pro debuts, it's not the kind of fight that you would stop in that situation, much less seasoned veterans like Frederick Lawson and Vergil Ortiz. So as I was thinking about it, and again, I was not being emotional, I was not doing this just, off the cuff. I was thinking about it, and I've been watching boxing since the late 1970s. I've gone back and watched, gazillions of hours of boxing from before that time period on videos and YouTube and things like that, and been covering boxing for going on 24 years. And I was thinking, I don't know if I can think of a worse stoppage ever, because of you're in the first round and nothing has happened that would make you think this man is in any trouble at all, that I have to stop the fight. Now, if you listen to Beto Duran, who was the analyst on the DAZN stream of the fight, he got a chance to talk to Tony Weeks. Tony did not do an on-camera interview, but at least he was gracious enough to talk to Beto off camera. And Beto he relayed the comments that Tony made to him in that conversation. He said, I'm paraphrasing, that he saw his eyes roll back in his head, talking about Lawson. And I'm not going to say Tony's a liar, but I don't know where that happened because I didn't see the kind of headshot that would have caused that to happen. So it's a terrible stoppage. You put it on top of the fact that the last higher profile fight that Tony officiated was the fight that we just mentioned, which was the Barroso Romero, which was another horrendous stoppage. That it might be time to, reassess things. I mean, you get to a certain point, you've done a certain number of fights, you get to a certain age, and maybe it's time to, do some other things. Kenny Bayless, who's been his Las Vegas co-worker in refereeing for decades, who is several years older than Tony's. I think Kenny's about 74, just announced about a week or so ago that he was going to retire. And, seems like he's stepping off at the right time. And, you can't tell can't tell Tony what to do, but, hopefully the commission has a hard conversation with him to figure out what the heck is going on, because that's just not acceptable. These guys' careers are at stake. Of course, their lives also, but not in the first round where nothing is really happening. Yeah. And some people suggested that maybe Tony is still cognizant or in the back of his mind that he was the referee in the ring in November of last year, or I should say of 2022, when David Morrell knocked out Yrsa Benuli up in Minnesota. And Yrsa Benuli obviously was severely injured. He wound up in a coma, had brain surgery, was, his career's over. He lived, and apparently he's okay, but that was obviously a critical situation that occurred on Tony's watch. So perhaps that's in the back of his mind. I can't read his mind, but I just know that when you watch a lot of boxing, what a shitty stoppage is. That was as bad as it gets.
And you mentioned in there about the commissions. Do you feel like there needs to be potential action taken? Because at the end of the day, Frederick Lawson or for Vergil Ortiz, it's costing them rounds. And even in Romero versus Barroso, that could have costed Barroso another opportunity, especially at his age, for shots at world honours, especially when he's leading the fight. So would you feel like sort of like higher action from commissions needs to potentially be taken when it comes to Tony Weeks?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't think they don't need to go out there and embarrass him publicly or anything like that. But the actions, we'll see. I mean, are they going to continue to assign him to these type of fights that are, higher profile, televised main event type fights, that sort of thing? Probably not. I mean, it's a fine line. Obviously, nobody wants to see a fighter get injured.
Yeah.
But it's boxing, and guys get hit. I mean, that's the sport. So as I mentioned, you ruined the situation for Lawson, who should have been given the opportunity to continue, even though, again, he had taken a few punches, but nothing that looked like he was about to get knocked out. For Vergil Ortiz, had been out of the ring for a very long time. He's trying to work his way back into fighting condition, if you will, and deserve the opportunity. And if he's going to get a knockout, let him get one that at least is more, pretty, let's say. Then you also take into account the fact that there's, thousands of paying fans there that paid for tickets that have been robbed of the event, short-circuited for no apparent reason. It's just unacceptable all the way around, no matter how you cut it. Now, I know if there had been an injury, then people would be second-guessing also, but that's the nature of the sport. And in that particular case, I'm always cool with stopping the fight a punch too soon when that there's a problem. Not in round one where nothing has happened. What can I say?
Absolutely. I think many people would agree with you there. From sort of negative news to positive news, Anthony Joshua's next fight seems to be set to be confirmed March the 8th against Francis Ngannou. This is obviously, as when it comes to someone like Ngannou, it does come with mixed reviews, especially sort of maybe more or less calmed down after the Fury fight. But what do you make of this fight being made on March the 8th in Saudi Arabia?
Well, you said good news. I was going to say some people might say it's bad news because for them, it's not the kind of fight they want to see Anthony Joshua in. But listen, I get it. I mean, whatever you thought about Ngannou fighting Fury, he certainly proved himself against Fury. Yes, he got a loss on his record, but there was a lot of people that thought he deserved to win the fight against the heavyweight champ. He did score the big knockdown against Tyson Fury in the third round on a beautiful left hook. So, when Deontay Wilder lost, remember when that card that took place on December 23rd, the whole plan there was that if Wilder comes through the fight against Joseph Parker and Joshua did the same against Otto Wallin, that they had signed contracts to fight each other on that March date. And so when Wilder lost, okay, the question becomes, who is Anthony Joshua going to fight? He's still got some obligations between the Saudis and him and vice versa. And, he's in position to fight potentially for what will eventually become the vacant IBF title pending, the result of what happens in Usyk and Fury in February. But you tell me, if you're going to fight Filip Hrgovic for the vacant IBF title, or you can fight Francis Ngannou, which is maybe not for a title, but certainly a much, much bigger profile fight in terms of the overall world interest, let's say. And you're going to make probably way more money for the Ngannou fight. And I'm not going to say it's an easy fight, but I think it goes to reason that it's definitely an easier fight than Hrgovic, who's an Olympic medalist, who's an accomplished professional heavyweight, who's undefeated, who's got some good wins. And, he's not a guy that's come over from MMA, who, if you look at it and you give Ngannou a lot of credit for what he did with Fury, you can also certainly, two things can be true at the same time. Yes, he did a great job against Fury, but let's be honest, Fury, it seems to me, and I think most would agree, did not come to that fight taking it as seriously as maybe he should have, and that probably led to some of the problems that he had. So if you're Joshua, of course, and the Saudis, they wanted the fight. They're the ones putting up all this, big amount of money for these events. And so I've got no problem with Anthony Joshua taking on Francis Ngannou. When Fury fought him, A, he's the heavyweight champion. B, he hadn't fought for quite some time. So there's that aspect where he's coming off of a long layoff. And also, Anthony Joshua has been very active. This was his, the fight that he had in December was his third fight of the year. This will be now in March. It'll be his fourth fight. I believe it'll be, in 11 months or 12 months. So, I mean, he's staying active by heavyweight standards and by even any boxing, top level fighter standards. So, and he's not a champion. He's trying to round himself back into shape. He's going to sit there and wait to see what happens in Usyk and Fury. So even though he could potentially fight Hrgovic, but obviously the much bigger fight would be the winner of Usyk Fury at some point. So yeah, take the Ngannou fight. It's going to be a big spectacle. People are going to give Ngannou a much bigger chance based on the Fury result. And I, for one, have no problem with it. And actually, because of what I saw in the Ngannou Fury fight, and having seen the way Joshua looked in his fight against Otto, it makes me more interested to see the two of them with each other. It's it's a fun spectacle. I thought Fury Ngannou was a fun spectacle. Also, it was just more irritating because Fury hadn't defended the title in a while, and we were still hoping that the Usyk fight would happen. Once they made the Ngannou fight, and then it was soon after the Usyk fight was signed, I was fine with that also. So you know what? This is showbiz. It's sports. It's business in general. So let him go do that fight, and I'm sure if Joshua wins, he'll find himself in other big fights against more experienced top level heavyweights afterwards.
And you mentioned previously about Fury potentially not taking the fight seriously. Do you feel like the result of that played into AJ's hands, because we aren't looking into the realm of the unknown with Francis Ngannou now? We know he's a capable puncher, put down Tyson Fury, and AJ now knows that the damage that Ngannou could inflict on him. So could make for a more interesting fight. Do you feel like that?
Well, I think that Joshua knows now that it's not to be a joke. And obviously, if the Fury fight hadn't happened, he probably wouldn't have got the opportunity to fight Anthony Joshua. So I do think that he's taking it seriously. I mean, first of all, at least in my experience, having watched Anthony Joshua his entire professional career, I can't tell you that there's been a boxing match that he's had where I've looked at him and said, I don't think Anthony Joshua took this fight seriously. Even when he lost against Andy Ruiz, or when he lost against Alexander Usyk, I didn't feel like he wasn't prepared for those fights, or wasn't taking it seriously, or came in terribly out of shape or anything along those lines. So he just got he got beat by the better guy against Usyk, and Andy Ruiz is a good puncher and he caught him, which happens in boxing, particularly in the heavyweight division. So I think Joshua is going to be prepared, and he should be. It's a good thing because he's active, and that means he's staying in camp, staying in shape, and moving towards this other fight. So no, I don't think he's taking it lightly. I think it's he knows. I mean, I'm sure he can go back and look at the video. I'm sure the people in his camp can say, don't forget, he put Tyson Fury on his ass. He's capable of doing the same thing to you. And I give Francis Ngannou a lot of credit. I mean, yes, of course, he's being highly compensated in terms of the money for these types of fights. But for a guy that's had now one professional fight, that by the time he's done with two professional fights, he'll have fought Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua in back-to-back fights. And that should be a lesson to every other boxer out there, heavyweight or otherwise, that when they get offered the opportunity to fight big fights for career money, why are you running away from them?
Absolutely, yeah, definitely, for sure. And one thing I wanted to mention when it came to Ngannou I spoke to Billy Nelson this morning, who obviously represents Martin Bakole, and he spoke about the frustrations with someone like Ngannou, who has almost jumped the queue in a way when it comes to having sort of contenders being in big fights. Would you understand those frustrations when it comes to heavyweight contenders, where you have
I
someone
mean,
like Ngannou who jumps the queue?
I understand it, but I don't give it any credence because, if you're going to get to the big fights, number one, you have to earn it. And I'm not knocking Martin Bakole or anything like that.
Yeah.
I have nothing bad to say about him. I don't know if I can say he's earned, some big mega fight. And when you're a star and the fans want to see you and you have a certain level of accomplishment, even in terms of Ngannou, what's in the mixed martial arts field, that has its privileges. There's a lot more people out there that would be interested to pay money and watch a Francis Ngannou fight an Anthony Joshua than would be to do that between him and Martin Bakole or many other heavyweights out there that have rankings or have good records, et cetera. So, I understand the frustration, but, that's life. We all are grown-ups here and, it's business and that's the way it goes. And if you don't like it, then do something about it. And the way you do something about it is take advantage of when you get opportunities and go out there and look spectacular and get a knockout and make the fans want to pay to watch you fight.
Definitely. And one thing I also did want to ask you about is I spoke to you after the Wallin fight with AJ, and I talked about the gap closing between Fury and AJ, and fans could potentially be seeing that now more than ever. And obviously now with AJ fighting Ngannou, and obviously it's been a hypothetical situation because it is after Fury Usyk. But do you feel like we are now seeing the resumes being compared with Fury beating Wilder, and then Wilder losing to Parker, and then people comparing, Fury's performance to Ngannou to then say if AJ, knocks out Ngannou, then we're seeing these fights, the potential resumes being compared to try and sell that fight later down the line. That makes sense.
Well, you're always going to have, whenever you've got, the bigger names in a weight class, you're always going to compare resumes. I mean, go back a few years ago, we watched, say, for example, we watched Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao before they fought each other. We're all running through the same top level opponents, and we compared them, whether it was, they both had fought Miguel Cotto, they both fought Ricky Hatton. I mean, there was other common opponents that they had, and it's sort of the same thing in the heavyweight division. You're always going to compare against each other. I don't think it necessarily helps or hinders of making the big fight. Yeah. I just think that it just gives us things to sort of discuss and think about before they get to the big fight. It adds a little bit of a conversation because we can compare them against each other. But, anybody that follows boxing for any period of time knows, put it like this, go back to the great, the tri-rivalry, let's say, between Ali, Frazier, and Foreman. So Muhammad Ali, of course, suffers a loss to Joe Frazier. He knocks out George Foreman. Well, then, of course, George Foreman or, Frazier should beat George Foreman based on that, comparison. Yeah. And what happened? George Foreman, just beat Frazier up and knocked him out very easily. So it doesn't always work that way. But look, the biggest fights at the end of eras, eventually there's guys that are still standing. At the moment, it's Joshua and it's Fury. And I would think that at some point, even if a guy loses, they're still going to be the biggest names that someday that fight's going to happen. I mean, I take a look at it and I think back to like the Lewis and Tyson and Holyfield, that era. We went through that whole period of time. One of the best heavyweight eras in boxing was that 1990s, where those three guys were the biggest names. Plus, you had the second career of George and Michael Moore and Riddick Bowe, and there's a lot of good heavyweights, Tommy Morrison and Ray Mercer, and it was a great heavyweight era, and a lot of those guys all squared off and faced each other. People like to dog on the heavyweights now when they get down on this guy, they get down on that guy, but I'm telling you, years from now, when we look back, you're going to look back at this era. Absolutely. I promise you this is the case. And they're going to look at this era that we're in the midst of. We're getting to the end of it, but they're going to look back and say, this was one of the great heavyweight eras in boxing. You got the 1970s of Ali, Frazier, Foreman, and Norton and others. And you got the 90s that are the guys I just mentioned. Well, we're going to look back and we're going to talk about someday, I promise you, the good old days. Oh, Fury and Wilder and Joshua and Hrgovic and Zhang Zhilei and, Joseph Parker and other heavyweights who are mixing and matching with each other. And we're in the middle of it now. We're going to get to a point where when Fury and Joshua finally fight, it'll be probably about the end of that era in the next couple of years as they peter out. And we'll finally, get that resolution like we did. And I'm telling you, this is exactly how I felt at the time. I can remember having the conversation, sitting in the press conference after Lewis Tyson. Now that fight happened in say about 2001, but in essence, it ended the era of the 90s. It was the last big fight of that group of the guys I just mentioned. And we're going to get to a point with this group where that's going to happen, where it's going to be Fury against Joshua at some point. Maybe someday we'll see Wilder against Joshua, but I'm telling you, it's going to happen. We're going to look back on this era fondly. We're seeing these big mega shows that they're doing now in Saudi Arabia with a lot of heavyweight action. We've seen other heavyweight top fights of the times, whether it's the trilogy of Wilder and Fury or the two fights between like a Zhang Zhilei and Joe Joyce. We're seeing, Joshua has fought Joseph Parker. He's fought other guys. Ngannou sort of in there in the middle there as sort of like a late addition, let's say, in some of these more spectacle kind of fights. But they're going to happen, and we're always going to compare their resumes the same way we still do today when you talk about Holyfield and Lewis and Tyson and the big names from that period of time.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the spot.
I'm putting my historian hat on,
Yeah, I was loving that. Definitely. Just to sort of move on from that topic. After Undisputed, how quickly do you feel like the IBF will move to ordering Hrgovic and Joshua for the vacant belt potentially?
Well, there's going to be a period of time after the first fight happens where they're not going to have to make a decision like that day. But because of the previous IBF ruling stating that Hrgovic is the mandatory and that the winner of Fury and Usyk will be required to fight that fighter in a mandatory fight, knowing the IBF, it would not be a surprise to me if when they fight on that Saturday, that on Monday morning, the letter will go out to whoever the winner is and to the Hrgovic team saying, you have a certain number of time. They know the fight's not going to happen for a few months, obviously, or however long, but they're going to make it known that the order has been made and that you should begin negotiations, and they'll give them a period of time. And at some point there would be a purse bid. And then at that point, you're going to have a situation where whoever is the winner is going to have to make the determination that they're going to either have to vacate or not. But again, it's going to depend on if the second fight's going to happen. Now, my understanding is that the loser of the fight between Fury and Usyk is going to have the right to exercise a rematch. Typically, that would be a case they might have 30 days to do so, something like that. Like, it's not like they're going back to the dressing room and they have to say right away what they're going to do. They get a little bit of a grace period. Maybe the IBF will take that into consideration, but knowing how they like to follow their rules to the letter, it's unlikely. So I think the order of that fight of Hrgovic against the winner will come very, very quickly after the fight. And then there'll be a short period of time. It could be a couple of weeks till that plays out. And once we have a resolution and presumably the winner ends up vacating, then like literally the next day or maybe that day, you will see the order go out for Hrgovic to fight whoever the next leading available contender is. Now, Joshua, if he's fighting against Ngannou, you never know if he loses or gets injured. Maybe he's not available. Maybe some other case comes up. They're just going to go down their rankings. Presently, as they're constructed, you got Hrgovic as number one. Number two is Otto Wallin, but he will drop out when the new rankings come out. And number three is Anthony Joshua. Yeah. So, you can see how that's going to play out.
And when it comes to the undercard on March the 8th, Zhilei Zhang and Deontay Wilder were both talked about potentially featuring there, either against each other or against other opponents. What can you take from that understanding of that potential undercard?
Well, my understanding, I've talked to the Zhang team. He's on the card. There's no doubt about that. He's going to be on that show. Whether Wilder is on the show is not 100%. I know from talking to the Wilder team, they'd like to be on the show. Certainly, there's a conversation about maybe the possibility of, as you mentioned, Zhang against Wilder on the card. I kind of get the feeling that while it is possible, I don't know if I kind of don't think that necessarily is going to happen. But as they say in the business, it's a fluid situation. So I believe Zhang will be on the card against somebody. Wilder may be on the card, maybe against Zhang, but could be against somebody else. Because this all just is coming together. By the time you post this video, it could be different what the result is. But it's definitely a fluid situation. It's a conversation they're having. I mean, they gotta see what they want to do. But you can be sure that it's going to be a card that's going to have a bunch of heavyweights on there.
Yeah. What I suppose Saudi are sort of keeping their favour with the heavyweights as with February 17th as well as there's sort of not been much on the undercard at the moment, but they just announced today that Joe Cordina is fighting Anthony Cacace. Is it sort of anything from your understanding of what we could see on February the 17th with Fury Usyk on that undercard?
So you're saying that Cordina is going to be on that card. So
Yeah,
besides, obviously, that's not a heavyweight fight, but yeah, that's
yeah,
good to
of
see.
course, yeah,
A good champion like Cordina get that position. Again, it's all being worked on. I mean, if you take a look at the way that the December 23rd came together, when they realized there was not going to be the Fury Usyk fight on that date, they ended up putting together those 8 fights. In a very short period of time. They're basically in the process of doing that now for the 23rd. The only other thing that I think is pretty solid, I don't know if it's signed, but and I've been hearing this for a while now, is that the former light heavyweight champion Sergey Kovalev, who is now fighting as a cruiserweight, there's a very likely chance that he's going to be on that undercard, which makes sense because Usyk and Kovalev share the same manager. So that's not out of the realm of making sense. So it seems to me that we'll see Kovalev on that card. Obviously, we got the big main event. If Cordina is going to be in a title defense on the undercard, there's going to be some spots for other guys also. We'll see how they play that out. But I was kind of thinking, again, I don't know for sure, but I was thinking because Opataya had such a quick, easy fight on the 23rd, and then he has some kind of arrangement with the Saudis also. It wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that he might be back in very short order to box on that card. If the Saudis do it the way they've done the Tyson Fury Ngannou card and the December 23rd card, I think we can all be expecting, whatever the show is, that it's going to at least be something worthwhile.
Absolutely, definitely. And lastly, just before we end this interview off, I did want to touch on Ryan Garcia. His situation. I mean, this weekend has been a bit of a crazy one for him. Sort of all in his personal life, in boxing, a lot of things have gone on. From a lot of the understanding, we thought he'd be fighting Devin Haney. Now saying that he's going to fight Rolly Romero instead. I mean, what are your thoughts on this and where you stand with the Ryan Garcia situation as it is? In boxing, I guess.
It's boxing. Things change. Things are what they're supposed to be until they aren't, right? So he changed his mind, apparently. It seemed like for a while that Devin Haney and Ryan Garcia wanted to fight each other. They both were respectful of each other, even though they're competitors. They have 6 fights with each other in the amateurs. Obviously, it was a big opportunity for Haney to defend the title for the first time at the junior welterweight limit against a big name and a big event. And for Ryan, it would be a big event also and an opportunity to win a world title in a fight that they both claimed that they wanted. That Eddie Hearn and Golden Boy and Oscar De La Hoya, they had some conversations about it. So everybody kind of thought it would get made. Ryan asked his team to please go and try to make that fight, which is what De La Hoya tried to do or was in the process of trying to doing. And for whatever reason, he suddenly has changed his mind. And now he's saying, I want to fight Rolly Romero, which is a guy that they were talking about before the Haney thing came up. Some people are speculating because Ryan now has at least a friendly relationship with Floyd Mayweather, who was Rolly's promoter for a long time, who obviously has a longstanding beef with Oscar De La Hoya. And he and Ryan were out, I guess, doing a late night, some road work in Las Vegas, in the recent days that maybe Floyd's been in Ryan's ear. Who the heck knows? Obviously, if you're fighting Haney for the title, it's a bigger event. If you're fighting Rolly, it's not as big of an event, no matter what they say. I definitely believe it's not as big an event. But that said, it's a much more winnable fight for Ryan Garcia. Now, the WBA is going to have a say-so whether, if that fight were to happen, if it would be for the title. Now, Ryan claims, said it to me in an interview prior to the fight with Duarte, that now winning a world title is a big deal for him, whereas before it really wasn't. He wanted to make his name, wanted to make a ton of money. He's done that. Now he wants to be a world champion. Well, Rolly Romero, based on having the WBA title when he comes back, is obligated to take on Barroso in a rematch. But if you're Rolly, what are you going to do? Are you going to take on Barroso in a rematch in a fight where you were being taken to school by a 40-year-old guy? Or are you going to give up your title potentially and make a multi-gazillion-dollar fight against Ryan Garcia? I'm pretty sure we know what the answer there is. So we're going to have to see how that plays out. I mean, just because Ryan said it on his social media the other night, I'm not saying he's lying. I'm just saying the story is not done being written. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the door is closed on a Haney fight the same way. You could still possibly see him fight against Romero. And as I mentioned, in terms of what the belt situation is, the WBA will have a say. Certainly they can make the fight and he can give up the title and no one can stop him from doing that. And then Barroso would just be elevated to the WBA champion. But I think there's still a few more twists and turns, let's say, before this saga is concluded.
Absolutely. Just as we close this off, in the new year, people will be having New Year's resolutions. one New Year's resolution I think people should have is to sign up to the newsletter and start listening to the podcast. As I always like to do, where can we find you? Where can we see your podcast? And where can we read your newsletter, mate?
Well, I agree with that assessment. That's a great New Year's resolution. You go on danrafael.substack.com, you put your email into the prompt, and you'll start receiving those email blasts when I do them pretty much every day, about 6 days a week, probably sometimes a couple per day. And for those who are really into it, we offer a paid plan, which is good, helps pay the bills. And the podcast, twice a week, every Thursday, every Sunday with my partner, TJ Reeves. And we go over the fights, and we have interviews, and we talk about the results. And it's been a great pleasure. That's on any podcast you can find. It's in the newsletter, but it's also on all your typical locations, Spreaker and Apple, and you name it. So we've been doing that now. It'll be about a year and a half. We're having a blast doing it.
Absolutely, definitely. It's always enjoyable to read it and listen and consume everything that you're putting out. Dan, I just want to say thank you for taking time to speak to me. Good to kick off 2024 with a bang, with some exciting boxing news, and I'm sure we'll be catching up very, very soon, mate. Thank you.
Sounds good. Appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
No problem at all, mate. Top man. Thank you.
We need to think of a new advert for freebets.com.
Get your best betting offers from freebets.com.
Yeah, that'll do.
The following deals are now live.